Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 2006 fantasy epic 300. Now, 300 is one of those films that was a surprise box office hit for the studio. I mean, it made over $400 million worldwide on a $50 to $60 million budget. Zack Snyder at the time was still a pretty young, fledgling filmmaker. He directed Dawn of the Dead in 2004, and it was a surprise hit. But at the same time, he wasn't this big, well-known name. 300 was a graphic novel by Frank Miller that had some fans, but it wasn't this massive pop culture phenomenon like other graphic novels like Watchmen. So it wasn't one of those projects that I think once it was announced that people were like, yeah, that's going to be one of the biggest hits of the year. And because of some clever marketing and because of the fact that it just came out at the right time, it really did not only leave a mark on the box office, but on pop culture. So it's one of those movies where I would definitely say when it comes to this decade of the 2000s, 300 is definitely one of those films that I think of when I really do take a look back at this decade, for better or worse. And that says a lot. Now, the film is directed by Zack Snyder, who, to me personally, this is the kind of film where he is at his best. A movie that's more style than substance, a film that's not trying to be deep, it's not trying to be thought-provoking, it's not trying to have a message. I don't feel Zack Snyder as a filmmaker, and especially as a screenwriter, is really as capable of pulling off these films with more substance, like what he has been doing as of late. So, he's much more closer to other more bombastic filmmakers, like Michael Bay. I agree with a lot of other people's views of him that he's much more closer to Michael Bay than he is James Cameron or Steven Spielberg or some of these other filmmakers that have more of a ability to do different kinds of films that have more substance or weight to them. And from a directorial standpoint alone, I think Zack Snyder is a very talented filmmaker. That's definitely on display here. This is an impressive looking film. I really felt that he did a solid job directing this movie, especially when it comes to the moments of pure spectacle. The action sequences, the battles, they are the epitome of epic. And despite the fact that he tends to overuse and overdose on slow motion camera work, he excels at that. He's one of the best at shooting slow motion sequences and getting the most that he can out of an action scene with slow motion when it's used moderately, when it's used within limitations. When it's overdone, then it loses a lot of its luster and it loses a lot of its impact. But it's not necessarily due to his lack of ability when it comes to shooting the slow motion sequences. He's really good at that. There were a lot of action sequences in this with the Spartans fighting the Persians, where they're stabbing them with spears and hitting them with shields and swords that were so much more jaw-dropping in terms of their visual power because of the slow motion camera work. It's a shame that he relied upon it a little too much, though, because it tended to cheapen the slow motion camera work. And especially nowadays, he just uses it so much that it no longer feels as special. And he also did a good job shooting other sequences that didn't have slow motion, that were just trying to be more dramatic, or just building a certain narrative, or creating a certain presence for characters like Xerxes. And he definitely set up his shots well in terms of the right use of camera angles. I felt that there were a lot of well timed and well used pans and zooms and other techniques that were on display here. So, yeah, from a directorial standpoint, 300 is, I would say, definitely one of his best efforts. Now, the film falters a little bit, though, with its screenplay by Zack, Kurt Johnstad, and Michael B. Gordon. It's based on the graphic novel of the same name by Frank Miller and Lynn Varley. And I haven't read the graphic novel in years, so I can't really say for sure which one is better, or if this is a great or proper adaptation of the source material. But I appreciate the fact that it doesn't change too much. There are things that are added here that were trying to give certain characters more to do, like Queen Gorgo, and there are other characters that are fleshed out some more to make them carry a little more weight, or at least the attempt to have them carry more weight. And some of them work, but other ones just feel like they're tacked on and are nowhere near as effective as the rest of the story. I also really appreciate the fact that the film embraced the comic book nature of the plot. The comic was not historically accurate at all. It wasn't trying to be. So I appreciate a lot that the film wasn't like, yeah, let's make this more accurate to history because we want to appeal to critics, we want to get some Oscars. I appreciate that did not happen here. I really do appreciate that, because this film is at its best when it is unrealistic and it's complete fantasy. So the critics who criticize this film for being unrealistic, come on, well, like, just stop. I don't understand that. I never got that criticism. This film is not bad or terrible because it's not historically accurate to the Spartans and the Battle of the 300 and whatever. It's a fictional account of that battle. It's always been a fictional account of that battle with a lot of hyper stylized elements and just a lot of pure fantasy that's injected right into the heart of it. So the story begins with a little bit of a rundown of Sparta and its history and the mythos of Sparta and so on and so forth, and the legend of Leonidas and how he became the king of Sparta. And that stuff's okay, but it's not as interesting to me or as engaging as the battle itself. This is one of those screenplays that I would probably give like a B minus, because the first half of the film is a little too slow in terms of how the story unfolds, and once you get to the battle, once you get to the 300 Spartans deciding to go to that narrow pass and fight the Persian army, the film really picks up the pace and is honestly nearly relentless in terms of its pacing, because there's just one big, crazy, insane battle after another. And it becomes a spectacle that leaves your jaw dropping wide open on more than one occasion because of just how massive the size and scope of it is. So when it goes to Sparta and is focusing more on this political insurrection with Queen Gorgo and this other guy, um, Theron, who was a who was a character that was created solely for this film and was never in the graphic novel, and you can really tell. So when it focuses on this political insurrection with the queen at home in Sparta while her husband Leonidas is fighting the Persians and all of the odds that comes with that, it's dull. It's not nearly as interesting. It's not nearly as entertaining. It's not nearly as captivating. So that's why I give the screenplay a B minus. Because when it gets to the point where the 300 are forming the shield wall and they're fighting all these hordes of Persians in various different ways and succeeding, and bodies are hitting the floor and in absolutely absurd numbers to the point where they are even building walls out of Persian bodies. And there's like elephants and there's rhinos, and it's just insanity, and it's a lot of fun to watch. So when it gets to that point, the film is really a treat, and is definitely one of the better movies of this type from this decade. And another thing that I definitely would say is not that strong is the characters here. They're not very strong characters in terms of the development, in terms of their depth. I would say the most developed and the strongest character in terms of the depth is Queen Gorgo. I mean, the other characters here, you got a guy Delios, who's just really a narrator, and that's really about it. Uh, Leonidas, there's character development with him in terms of his past and so on, but it's still a pretty empty character in terms of your ability to empathize or really relate to him. Uh, and a lot of his platitudes, a lot of his quotes, a lot of this, a lot of hoorah, rah rah kind of speech that after a certain point kind of starts to fall on deaf ears, because there are successful moments like, tonight we dine in hell, but there are other moments where it just comes across as a little heavy-handed or forced, or just really nothing that special. And the rest of the 300, there's not much to them. I mean, he's got a captain, Artemis. He's got Astenios, Artemis's son. You've got this deformed outcast, Ephialtes, who's like a hunchback, who then turns on them because Leonidas refused to let him be a part of his rank. And in the way that he explained it was matter of fact, and I know it's gotten criticized for being like against disabled people, and I really don't understand that, because from his perspective it makes a lot of sense. You can't actually have a strong shield wall if you have one guy who, because of his disability, cannot do that properly. He can't lift the shield up. He can't, and with a shield wall, all it takes is one weakness, one weak point, and then it's useless. So I don't really think he did the wrong thing there. I really think he definitely had the right idea. It's war. And in war, you need to have the best strategy in order to succeed. And you can't have people who can't hack it in the thick of battle. It's just not going to work. I know the film's been criticized for being racist and xenophobic. I disagree with that. I didn't see a lot of that here. I think a lot of people are looking way too much into things if they're getting that from this movie. I know people have criticized Xerxes and how he's portrayed as being homophobic. I didn't really view it that way. If that character, in the way that he's portrayed as being maybe bi, is homophobic, then so is the character in Stargate. Remember Raw? That character was portrayed in almost the exact same way, and I don't remember anyone at the time saying it was homophobic, and I don't remember, I have not seen a single article that I know of that is saying that it's homophobic now. Excuse me. Just talking about all that shit, um, clearly got my voice all raw and distorted, and even my body is rebelling against that kind of bullshit. People just put way too much politics into things, and this is no exception when it comes to this movie. Yes, there are some people that are part of the Persian army that are portrayed by African American actors. Don't you think that if this was truly as racist as a lot of people are making it out to be, that none of these actors would agree to be a part of this movie? Don't you think? Don't you think that would be the case? Because this came out in 2006. So I don't agree with that. But yeah, character-wise, they could be a little stronger. I like Michael Fassbender's performance as Dana Keys, but the character itself, I don't really know that much about him, and there's really not much there. So it makes their sacrifice at the end kind of meh, because of the fact that these characters are so shallow and one-dimensional. So that's one aspect of the screenplay that isn't the best either. And the villains are pretty one-dimensional too. You don't know that much about Xerxes. You don't know that much about really anyone in his army. So it would have been nice to have had more depth with either side, because then it would make the battle feel like it's more than just fancy, but genuinely entertaining window dressing. Because it doesn't seem like there's a lot of weight to it, because of the fact that the development is so lacking. From a technical standpoint, the film is terrific. I mean, it features some nice cinematography by Larry Fong. The editing by William Hoy I thought was excellent. There were a lot of times where the editing really did ramp up the adrenaline, ramp up the excitement, because it matched so perfectly with the really over-the-top camera work and slow motion and carnage that is present throughout the film. Now, the music by Tyler Bates, it's not one of his best scores, but it's pretty good. But the issue with the score is that most of the best pieces are just ripped off from Elliot Goldenthal's score in Titus. And it was so egregious that Warner Brothers even apologized publicly to Elliot Goldenthal. They're like, yeah, we have noticed the distinct similarities between your work and Tyler Bates's compositions in this film. We want to apologize. And I honestly got to give Warner Brothers a lot of credit for doing that. They easily could not have even done that at all. And they chose to do it anyway, out of respect to Elliot Goldenthal. But yeah, if you listen to some of the pieces from Titus, and then you listen to few of the pieces from 300, it is really egregious. It's a straight up copy and paste job. So that makes the score lose a little bit of its luster for me, considering that a good chunk of it is just completely ripped off from another score. But it's still some really good music, and I think it would have been better it would have went down better for me if Elliot Goldenthal was just asked, he was just approached by the filmmakers and by Tyler Bates to use or sample his score officially, instead of this unofficial shit, because that's really shady. And I do also have to admit that the style of the film with the blue screen and the filtering at times can be a little too jarring and a little too much of a disconnect from reality. At times, I don't mind it because it's definitely something that was prevalent in the graphic novel, and I appreciate the authenticity when it comes to trying to bring to the screen a visual style that's as close to the comic as possible. But at other times, it's just a little ugly and it's just a little too brown and gray for my tastes. And then you have the CGI blood, which I'm not a fan of. I know why it's there, because it's another instance of trying to match the style of the graphic novel. But I just would have preferred to have had more practical blood and gore, because a lot of these sequences are very bloody, but the blood doesn't really have the same visceral feel to it that it would if it was done practically. But all of that being said, for the most part, I do like this film. And it's just one of those movies where I'm not gonna say it's a great movie, it's a masterpiece, because the script isn't as good as it could be. The character depth is really shallow. The performances by the cast members, Gerard Butler, he's very sincere as Leonidas, but a lot of it is very hoorah, very bombastic, very over the top. And he really just comes across as a WWE wrestler. And I don't mind that because I'm a big fan of WWE or wrestling in general, but that's really what his character comes across as, is a babyface wrestler. And other characters, like I said, because of the lack of depth, the actors themselves aren't really able to bring much to the table. David Wenham as Delios, good job narrating, but didn't really do much for me in terms of his performance. Nothing really that memorable or spectacular. Dominic West played a corrupt Spartan politician, and he was a douchebag, but the whole thing with him and Queen Gorgo was boring, so it didn't really do much for me. Lena Headey, I thought she was probably the one that delivered the best performance out of the entire cast, but she didn't have that many scenes where she was really involved in a plot that was as captivating as the other characters. Vincent Regan as Captain Artemis did nothing for me. His son, played by Tom Wisdom, was okay at best. Philites, the deformed outcast, meh. King Xerxes definitely was. There was a definite presence about him. I was intimidated by him. And Michael Fassbender, you could tell that he was having a lot of fun playing that role, and he was just oozing charisma, but that was more Michael Fassbender and what he brought to it, not really what the screenplay or what the writers brought to that role. And despite him bringing all of his charisma, I didn't really know that much about the guy, so it didn't really do that much for me either when he made his sacrifice. So like I said, these performances, they're fine, but they're nothing spectacular. They're nothing amazing. So it's just one of those movies where, yeah, like, what am I expecting? Oscar-worthy acting in 300? No. But maybe some performances that leave a little bit more of an impact. Other than Gerard Butler, who's doing his best WWE wrestler impression, or his best Sean Connery impression. Because I don't know about you, but I got serious Sean Connery vibes with his performance as Leonidas. There were some moments where the way that he was saying his lines, the way that he was delivering them, just reminded me of Sean Connery. Like, I could have seen Sean Connery play Leonidas when he was young. And, that's not a bad thing, because Sean Connery is a legend. But anyway, it's just one of those movies where I like it, but I never really loved the movie, and it's not a film that I'm going to watch over and over again. But I like a lot of the action, I like the spectacle, but it drags its feet a little too much, and the sacrifice at the end feels a little too empty because I don't really get that invested or that connected to these Spartans or these characters. But anyway, I don't know what else to say except thank you for watching my review of 300, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.